November 17, 1962. Vienna, Austria. The brass bell above the door jingled as Frederick Yates stepped into Gallery Kraus, a modest art dealership nestled between a cafe and a tobacconist on Kartnerstrasse. The gallery's warm interior offered welcome respite from Vienna's biting November chill. Frederick unwound his scarf and nodded to Herr Kraus, the elderly proprietor who was engrossed in conversation with another customer. Frederick pretended to study a landscape while surreptitiously observing the gallery. His position at the American Embassy as cultural attaché afforded him certain privileges, though his actual responsibilities extended far beyond promoting American art and literature. 3 years with the CIA's Vienna station had taught him to scan rooms automatically, exits, blind spots, surveillance positions. The gallery was quiet this afternoon, with only Herr Kraus, his assistant, and 2 customers, an elderly couple examining a still life. Perfect. Frederick moved toward the back room where newer acquisitions were displayed. He paused before a small Degas sketch. Nothing spectacular, but competent and authentic. The work wasn't what interested him, however. It was the man who would come looking for it. "Ah, Herr Yates," Kraus said, suddenly appearing at his elbow. "You have excellent timing. The new collection arrived yesterday." "Wonderful," Frederick replied. "Anything notable?" "Perhaps. There is a Klimt study that might interest the embassy's collection." This was their prearranged signal. Frederick nodded and followed Kraus to a private viewing room. Once the door closed, Kraus's demeanor changed. "He made contact," Kraus whispered. "Yesterday afternoon. Asked specifically about the Degas." "Did he identify himself?" "As we expected. Dr. Anton Werner from Prague University. His papers looked authentic, but the recognition phrase matched your description." Frederick nodded. Werner was the cover identity of Mikhail Sokolov, a KGB officer operating throughout Central Europe. Intelligence suggested he was coordinating a network of assets in Austria, but they'd never managed to catch him in the act. "When is he returning?" "Tomorrow. He requested a private viewing at 4 p.m. "Perfect," Frederick said. "We'll be ready." The following afternoon, Frederick sat in a cramped back office of the gallery, watching through a one-way mirror as Herr Kraus's assistant arranged the Degas sketch on an easel. The CIA had installed recording equipment overnight, microphones hidden in light fixtures, a camera disguised as a ventilation grate. At precisely 4 p.m., the front bell jingled. Frederick focused his binoculars on the man entering the gallery. Dr. Anton Werner appeared to be in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a scholarly appearance. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with the deliberate confidence of someone accustomed to commanding respect. Frederick watched as Kraus greeted Werner warmly, escorting him to the private viewing room. The conversation began with pleasantries about art and the weather, but soon turned to business. "The Degas is a remarkable find," Werner said, examining the sketch through a jeweler's loupe. "The provenance is satisfactory?" "Of course," Kraus replied. "It was part of the Rothschild collection before the war. I have all documentation." Werner nodded, setting down the loupe. "I would like to purchase it for my university's collection. The price is acceptable." Frederick tensed. This was moving too smoothly, too professionally. If Sokolov was here for a simple art purchase, they'd wasted months of intelligence work. Then it happened. "Before we complete the transaction," Werner said, "I wonder if you received any other items from the same collection? Perhaps something with more historical significance." Kraus feigned confusion. "Historical? The Degas is nearly 80 years old." "I was thinking of more recent history," Werner replied, his voice dropping. "Something from the war, perhaps. Documents or letters that might have been hidden with the artwork." Frederick smiled. There it was, the real purpose of Sokolov's visit. "Actually, Krauss said, following their prepared script. There was a portfolio of papers with the collection. I haven't had time to examine them properly. Werner's posture changed subtly, a slight forward lean, a new intensity in his eyes. I would be happy to evaluate them for you, he offered. My university specializes in wartime documentation. They're in my safe, Krauss said. Give me a moment. As Krauss left the room, Frederick switched on the radio transmitter clipped to his belt. Target is engaged. He's taken the bait. Stand by. Krauss returned carrying a leather portfolio tied with ribbon. These were with the collection. I assumed they were just provenance documents. Werner accepted the portfolio with barely concealed eagerness. When he untied the ribbon and opened it, his expression remained neutral, but Frederick could see his fingers tense. Inside were what appeared to be architectural drawings of military installations, along with typewritten pages in German. These are interesting, Werner said carefully. May I examine them more closely? Of course. Werner spread the papers on the table. They were, in fact, carefully prepared forgeries, convincing reproductions of Nazi-era documents detailing defensive installations along the Austrian-Czech border, positions that now housed Soviet bloc forces. The CIA had created them specifically for this operation, knowing that accurate Western intelligence about these positions would be of significant interest to Moscow. These appear to be military documents, Werner said, affecting surprise. I'm not sure they belong in an art collection. Are they valuable? Krauss asked. Werner hesitated, then made his move. They are primarily of historical interest. I could take them off your hands. Say, an additional 5,000 shillings with the Degas. That seems generous for old papers. Historical preservation is my university's mission, Werner replied smoothly. Frederick radioed his team. He's buying the documents. Maintain positions. The transaction proceeded efficiently. Werner paid for both the Degas and the documents, had them carefully wrapped, and departed with promises to return for future acquisitions. Frederick watched him leave, then emerged from the back office. Well done, Herr Krauss. He seemed very interested in those forgeries of yours. That's because they're not entirely forgeries, Frederick replied. 90% accurate information mixed with 10% carefully crafted misinformation. The kind of intelligence windfall that makes careers in Moscow. And now we wait. If Sokolov is who we think he is, he won't risk sending these through diplomatic channels. He'll want to verify them first, then hand them off personally. 3 days passed. Frederick's team maintained surveillance on Werner's hotel, his movements around Vienna, and the Czech embassy. Werner visited museums, attended a concert at the Musikverein, and dined at the city's finest restaurants, playing the part of the cultured academic perfectly. On the 4th morning, their patience was rewarded. Target is on the move, came the voice over Frederick's radio. He's carrying the briefcase and heading towards Stat Park. Frederick was already in position, dressed as a maintenance worker trimming the park's hedges. He watched as Werner entered from the east gate, walking unhurriedly along the gravel paths. The Soviet officer found an empty bench near the Johann Strauss monument and sat down, placing his briefcase beside him. Subject is at the drop site, Frederick murmured into his concealed microphone. Stand by. 10 minutes passed. Werner read a newspaper, occasionally checking his watch. At precisely 10:30, a woman in a red coat approached, carrying a paper bag from a nearby bakery. She sat at the opposite end of the bench. Second subject in position, Frederick reported. Female, mid-30s, red coat. The woman opened her bag and offered Werner a pastry. He declined but engaged her in conversation. Frederick couldn't hear them, but the body language was telling, the casual familiarity of people who knew each other well but were pretending to have just met. After 5 minutes of conversation, Werner stood to leave, accidentally knocking his newspaper to the ground. As he bent to retrieve it, the woman's handbag fell open. In the momentary confusion, Werner's briefcase and the woman's identical one switched positions. It was a classic brush pass, executed flawlessly. Had Frederick not been watching specifically for it, he might have missed it entirely. "Exchange complete," he whispered. "Primary team follow Werner. Secondary, stay with the woman." Frederick continued his gardening charade for another 10 minutes before casually walking to the park exit where a nondescript Volkswagen was waiting. "The woman?" he asked as he climbed in. "Heading north toward the Danube Canal," replied Wendy Winters, his fellow agent. Her blonde hair was tucked under a headscarf, her sharp blue eyes tracking their target through binoculars. "Two of our people are following on foot. She hasn't made us." "Werner, still at his hotel. He's scheduled to check out tomorrow." Frederick nodded. "The woman is our priority now. Werner's just the messenger. She's the one with connections." They followed at a distance as the woman in red walked along the canal, eventually entering a small apartment building in the 2nd District. "Address confirmed," Wendy said. "Wellestrasse 36, apartment 4B. Frederick checked his watch. "Let's run her details. I want to know everything about her by dinner." That evening, in a secure room at the American Embassy, Frederick studied the file compiled on the woman in red. Her name was Irina Petrovna. At least that was the name on her Austrian residency permit. She worked as a translator for a publishing house specializing in technical manuals. Her papers identified her as a Czechoslovakian refugee who had fled after the 1948 communist takeover. "Her documentation is impeccable," Wendy said, spreading photographs across the table. "But our Czech contacts say they've never heard of her. The family she claims to be from in Prague doesn't exist." "What about her apartment?" "Rented 3 years ago. Neighbors say she's quiet, keeps to herself. Works from home mostly." Frederick examined a surveillance photo taken earlier that day, Irina entering a grocery store. "She looks familiar somehow." Wendy passed him another file. "That's because we've seen her before. Different name, different hair, but same woman." The photograph showed a dark-haired woman at a diplomatic reception in Berlin 2 years earlier. She was listed as Elena Markov, secretary to the Soviet cultural attaché. "It's her," Frederick confirmed. "We've got our connection." Sokolov passes her the documents, and she feeds them into the Soviet diplomatic pipeline. "What's our next move?" Frederick considered their options. "We need to know who she reports to and how the information flows. If we move too soon, we lose the network. If we wait too long, our disinformation becomes useless." "There's another problem," Wendy added. "The Degas sketch Werner purchased is missing." Frederick looked up sharply. "What do you mean missing?" "It wasn't in his hotel room, and our people confirm it wasn't in the briefcase he swapped in the park. It's disappeared." Frederick's mind raced. The Degas itself wasn't valuable enough to warrant special attention. But if Werner had separated it from the documents, "The sketch is a key," he said suddenly. "Or it contains something." He grabbed the telephone and dialed Herr Kraus's home number. "The Degas," Frederick said when Kraus answered. "Did Werner examine it alone at any point?" "Only briefly, while I was retrieving the portfolio from the safe." "And the sketch itself, was there anything unusual about it?" "Anything at all." Kraus hesitated. "Well, it was mounted in an unusually thick frame. I assumed it was for preservation purposes." Frederick hung up and turned to Wendy. "We've been looking at this all wrong. The art isn't just cover. It's part of the operation. Get a team to Werner's hotel immediately." The search of Werner's room revealed nothing unusual, but a thorough examination of his movements showed he had visited a small framing shop near the Nashmarkt the morning after purchasing the Degas. He reframed it, Frederick realized. Whatever was hidden in the original frame, he extracted it and now it's either on him or already passed along. The operation shifted focus. Round-the-clock surveillance was established on both Werner and Irina. For 2 days, neither made unusual movements until Werner visited the Kunsthistorisches Museum. "He's standing in the Vermeer Gallery," reported an agent posing as a security guard. "He appears to be sketching." Frederick and Wendy hurried to the museum, positioning themselves where they could observe without being noticed. Werner sat on a bench before Vermeer's The Art of Painting, making careful drawings in a small notebook. "That's not suspicious by itself," Wendy whispered. "He's supposed to be an art professor." "No," Frederick agreed. "But look who just arrived." A museum custodian had entered the gallery, pushing a cleaning cart. He worked methodically around the room, eventually reaching the bench where Werner sat. As the custodian bent to empty a nearby trash bin, Werner set down his sketchbook, stood, stretched, and walked to examine a different painting. The custodian finished his task, moved on, with Werner's sketchbook now in his cart, replaced by an identical one on the bench. "Another exchange," Frederick murmured. "Follow the custodian." The custodian led them to the staff area, where he changed out of his uniform and exited through a service entrance. He walked to a tram stop and boarded a number 71 heading toward the Soviet War Memorial. "He's Russian embassy staff," Wendy confirmed after checking his photograph against their records. "Dmitry Vasilyev, listed as maintenance personnel." Frederick made his decision. "We've confirmed the network now." Werner obtains intelligence, passes it to Irina, who passes it to embassy staff. Time to move on the art angle. They returned to Gallery Krauss after hours. With her Krauss's permission, they examined the gallery's recent acquisitions and sales records. "Here," Frederick said, pointing to a ledger entry. 6 months ago, Krauss acquired a collection from the estate of Heinrich Müller, including the Degas that Werner purchased. "Müller," Wendy repeated. "Why is that name familiar?" Frederick was already pulling a file from his briefcase. "Because Heinrich Müller was the cover name of Stefan Kovacs, a Hungarian physicist who defected to the West in 1956. He worked on the Austrian nuclear research program until his death 3 months ago. And his art collection gets sold to Krauss, who unknowingly becomes a drop point for Soviet intelligence," Frederick finished. "The Soviets must have had Kovacs under surveillance, knew about his art collection. When he died, they saw an opportunity. But what was in the frame of the Degas? Let's find out." Further investigation revealed that Kovacs's personal effects had been stored by his attorney. With some diplomatic pressure, they gained access to the inventory. Among the items was a reference to personal papers and microfilm stored in modified artwork frames. "There it is," Frederick said. "Kovacs hid his research in his art collection. The Soviets found out somehow, but didn't know which pieces contained information. So they arranged for Werner to examine each piece as it came on the market," Wendy continued. "The documents we planted were just a bonus for them. And we inadvertently helped them acquire actual nuclear research data," Frederick concluded grimly. The next morning, an emergency meeting was convened at the embassy. The Vienna station chief, William Morris, listened to Frederick's explanation with growing concern. "Let me understand this," Morris said. "A Soviet illegal posing as an art dealer has acquired sensitive nuclear research hidden in a picture frame, and we've been tracking the wrong part of the operation?" "Not entirely wrong," Frederick replied. "We've identified a complete Soviet intelligence network. Werner, Irina, and now their connection to the embassy. But the nuclear research is already in their hands," Morris countered. Not necessarily, Wendy interjected. Werner passed something to the custodian yesterday, but we don't know it was the Kovacs material. He might still be verifying it. Morris considered this. What do you propose? We move now, Frederick said. Arrest Werner before he leaves the country. Turn him if possible. Either way, we disrupt the network and recover whatever he's found. And the woman? Irina? We watch her reaction. If she's as important as we suspect, Moscow will extract her once Werner is compromised. Morris nodded. Make it happen. But Frederick quietly. We don't need an international incident. The operation was planned for that evening. Werner was scheduled to attend a concert at the State Opera. Austrian security services, working with the CIA, would detain him as he left the performance, ostensibly for questioning about art smuggling. Frederick and Wendy positioned themselves outside the opera house in an unmarked car. The November night was clear and cold, the opera house illuminated against the darkness. As the concert ended and attendees began filing out, Frederick spotted Werner descending the grand staircase. Target in sight, he murmured into his radio. Moving toward the street, Werner paused at the bottom of the stairs, buttoning his overcoat. He seemed to survey the square before starting toward the taxi stand. Now, Frederick ordered. 2 Austrian police officers approached Werner, showing their identification. Frederick watched as they spoke briefly, then escorted Werner toward a waiting police car. Smoothly done, Wendy commented. Too smooth, Frederick replied, suddenly alert. Something's wrong. Werner was cooperating completely, showing no surprise or resistance. As he reached the police car, he turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the square, and for just a moment, his eyes met Frederick's across the distance. Werner smiled. It's a setup, Frederick realized. He made us from the beginning. He grabbed the radio. Abort! Abort the arrest. But it was too late. As the officers opened the car door for Werner, a flash of light erupted from beneath the vehicle. The explosion rocked the square, sending pedestrians screaming for cover. The police car burst into flames, Werner and the 2 officers disappearing in the inferno. My God, Wendy whispered. Frederick was already running toward the burning vehicle, but the heat drove him back. Fire trucks wailed in the distance. He sacrificed himself, Frederick said in disbelief. Or someone sacrificed him. The evidence is gone, Wendy noted. Whatever was in that frame died with him. Frederick shook his head. Not necessarily. Irina is still out there. They raced to Irina's apartment, but as they pulled up, they saw smoke billowing from her window. No, Frederick muttered, sprinting into the building. The door to apartment 4B had been left ajar. Inside, the small flat was engulfed in flames, papers and furniture burning fiercely. Frederick covered his mouth with his handkerchief and pushed through the smoke, searching for any sign of Irina. The apartment was empty. On the kitchen table, miraculously untouched by the spreading fire, sat the Degas sketch, removed from its frame. Frederick grabbed it and retreated as the ceiling began to collapse. Outside, he examined the sketch while fire engines arrived. She's gone, Wendy said, joining him. Neighbors say they saw her leave with a suitcase an hour ago. Frederick studied the Degas. It appeared ordinary until he held it up to the light of a street lamp. There, visible as watermarks in the paper, were detailed schematics. This was never about the frame, he realized. The paper itself is the document. Kovacs created his own art paper and drew on it to hide his research. And now the Soviets have it, Wendy concluded. Not quite, Frederick said. This is the original. Irina left it behind. Why would she do that? Frederick turned the sketch over. On the back, written in tiny, precise handwriting, was a message. Kovacs was my father. What Werner sought is destroyed. Goodbye, Mr. Yates. She played both sides, Frederick said quietly. She used the Soviet network to find her father's research, then destroyed it rather than let either side have it. Then the explosion at the opera was her way of cutting ties. Werner's death will be blamed on us. The Soviets will think we recovered the research. No one will look for her. In the days that followed, the official story described the incident as a gas line explosion. Werner's body, identified through dental records, was returned to Czechoslovakia with diplomatic apologies. The Soviet embassy filed a formal protest, which the American ambassador officially denied. Frederick submitted his report, detailing the network they had uncovered and the apparent destruction of Kovacs's research. He omitted his theory about Irina's true motives and kept the Degas sketch in his personal possession, telling Morris only that it had been destroyed in the apartment fire. 3 months later, Frederick was reassigned to Berlin. On his last day in Vienna, he visited Gallery Kraus to say goodbye to the old art dealer who had helped them. "I have something for you," Kraus said, handing him a small envelope. Inside was a postcard showing Degas's dance class from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. On the back was written simply, "The art remains. Nothing else matters." Frederick smiled and pocketed the card. Some Cold War secrets, he decided, were better left buried. 10 years later, long after Frederick had left the CIA and returned to civilian life as a professor of European history, he received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a frame containing the Degas sketch he had recovered that night in Vienna, professionally mounted and preserved. With it was a newspaper clipping about a promising new cancer treatment developed by a research team in Geneva, led by Dr. Irene Whitman. The photograph showed a woman with dark hair and familiar eyes, smiling at the camera. Frederick placed the framed sketch on his office wall. Some art, he thought, was valuable for reasons that had nothing to do with its beauty. And some spies, despite everything, found ways to serve humanity rather than nations.